All right. All right. Good evening. I'm here helping research the discovery made by Joe DeVoy. I have to admit that I was a little bit skeptical when he first called me about this discovery. I think of myself as a strong academic. And so we decided we were going to come to the source of knowledge about the contents of that diary. And I'm here with Michael O'Mahony. Michael O'Mahony, can you talk a little bit about your experience with history and genealogy?
Yes, Matt. I too, I suppose, was a bit skeptical when I heard the story that what Joe had found. But I'm a genealogist, and I'm also a local historian based in West Cork, so not too far away from where some of these events occurred. So I have been putting in some research in the meantime. So I think that the story holds up, as we will probably find out as we go through the interview over the next 20 or 30 minutes.
Amazing, amazing. So I just have a couple of questions about the discovery. Glad that Joe was able to get to Ireland and give you a chance to take a look at what he'd found. So as I said, we thought it might be a hoax, but from what we've talked about, you found evidence of a Sean Scanlan that lived in Cork and would have left around the time the diary says he would have been in America. So what did you learn about Sean?
Well, we have all land registers going back to the Middle Ages, to the 1600s, which shows a family by the name of O'Scanlan, which would be the Gaelic for Scanlan, being the registered owner of lands when lands were owned by the old Catholic chieftains and clans back before the Cromwellian plantations and confiscation. And Scanlan is found as being the owner of lands at a place called Listowel na Fuca, which translated into English would be the Black Fort of the Fairies. And at the time, before the Cromwellian confiscation and plantation, they were wise enough to map all Ireland and to classify the land into different categories, whether it was fertile, semi-fertile, just mountainy, whatever. And depending on its value, then it was given to the various adventurers who came with Cromwell as to what they were owed in terms of money. They were given land in lieu of money. And you may have heard of the phrase "to hell or to Connacht," which came from that because the land in Connacht wasn't worth a whole pile. So you had two options. If your land was being confiscated, you could either go to hell or go to Connacht. But anyway, to get back to this Listowel na Fuca, the Scanlan lands were transferred to an adventurer who came with Cromwell called Captain Reginald Kingbury. So it should be said, I suppose, that in all Ireland's checkered history, that the name Oliver Cromwell would probably be the most despised. But that being said, anyway, when Kingbury came, the Scanlans were, I suppose, fairly conniving people too, and clever in their own way, and wanted to hold on to some of their lands as much as they could. So some of them actually converted from being Catholics to become Protestants, which gave them certain rights. And they became serfs to Kingsbury and stayed with Kingsbury on the estate as serfs, which Sean Scanlan's, the man we're concerned about here, his immediate family didn't convert, and they went as outlaws. But when Captain Kingbury came, he was friendly with a man called Penn, who got lots of land in parts of County Cork, including my own home area here at Clonakilty. And they remained friendly for some time down to the next generation. But when it came to the time of William Penn to take over his lands in County Cork, including those here in Clonakilty, he decided land was not for him. And the Society of Friends, or the Quakers as we know them, had been set up in Ireland in 1654, comprising mostly of soldiers and farmers and merchants. And in 1670, William Penn decided to join the Society of Friends and to sell his lands. And apparently he was joined by some of the Scanlans who, when they had remained with Kingbury, they had changed their name from Scanlan to Harrison to be more accepted to the elite and to the Protestant community. So it is believed that a number of the Harrisons joined with William Penn to leave Ireland and to set sail for America. And there's a record of William Penn staying in a castle not far here from Clonakilty at Binduff Castle on the nights before he left for America. And we believe that some of the Harrisons were with him, and they took their journey to America, which is important in this story because, as you will know, at your end of the Atlantic, William Penn is the man who started the state of Pennsylvania. So anyway, as I say, Sean Scanlan's immediate family didn't convert. They went as outlaws into the hills and tried to fight their way back from there. And at that time, there was an organization which was a secret agrarian organization, nowadays to be termed as a sort of a terrorist organization. It was known as the Buachaillí Bána. Buachaillí meaning boys, and Bána meaning whites, so they were the white boys. They were terrorists in the 17th century, and they were a secret organization. They were oath-bound, and they were basically an organization amongst the peasantry. And the name was derived from the white smocks that they wore, and they only appeared at nighttime. So they were sort of ghostly figures, and the leadership of the organization was also sort of spiritual and ghostly. Nobody really knew who they were, whether they were real or not. And they, as I say, they operated by night, and there was the terror of the new landowners who would come in, like the King's boys and those. And they fought against the rack rents that were being applied by the new landlord, by the new gentry, by the tithe and the tax collections or for the Protestant clergy. They fought against evictions, religious suppression, and so forth. And the local leader in Lisduvnafuka was a man by the name of Donnacha Mór Dubh na Glanna, that would be in Gaelic, which translated would mean big black Guinness from the Glen. Now, Donnacha Mór Dubh apparently was a huge man. He was a fearsome figure. He was known to be able to break a man's back with his bare hands. So he was not a man to be trifled with. But this is important to the story.
Okay.
There would have been historic animosity between Donnacha Mór Dubh and Sean Scanlan, because, as I said earlier, the Scanlans were all Gaelic landowners themselves, but among their tenantry was the family of Donnacha Mór Dubh. Maybe they had been deprived or lost their lands at some stage, so there would have been a traditional animosity that would have existed between Donnacha Mór Dubh and Sean Scanlan. And I think as the story unfolds, that's probably an important item, you know.
Well, amazing, and I'll suggest that our eventual viewers do some background research on Oliver Cromwell and the atrocities committed there. That might take us too far afield, but yes. I think that our knowledge of that in America isn't always great. But I do want to stay on topic. So it was always surprising to us, this connection that locally, that a German would have come to what is Lancaster County and started making whiskey at the mill. That never really sat well with us. And so we wonder if Sean Scanlan had any background in distilling or whiskey that would have made sense for him to bring to America.
Yeah, like whiskey actually, Matt, is hugely significant to the story because Irish whiskey is one of the first to be distilled in Europe, commencing somewhere around the 12th century.
Wow.
So you see, the Irish monks and friars and those and priests were great travelers. They were constantly traveling to Europe on the high seas, on various ships and boats and so forth, and bringing back things with them. So the Irish monks brought back the technique of distilling perfumes back to their monasteries from their travel, and they succeeded in making beautiful perfumes themselves. And this would have happened somewhere around the year 1000 AD.
Wow.
So actually what happened then was the monks modified this technique from distilling perfume into distilling spirits. And this was called Ishka Baha. Ishka being the Irish for water, and Baha being the Irish for life.
For so life water, sure.
The water of life. So yeah. Phonetically, whiskey is Ishka Baha. And it should be remembered, and this is a message for the Scots, this all happened hundreds of years before the Scots thought at all about distilling whiskey. So close to where the Scandals lived, there was a monastery called Ahabaha. Aha would be a pathway or a ford to life. So whether it was a pathway to the spiritual life or a pathway to the life of whiskey, we don't know. But like the monks in the monastery in Ahabaha had been the hereditary spiritual advisors to the Scandals when they were landowners themselves. Now, I'm not sure if they were Franciscans or what orders they were, but they had contact with a number of monasteries. In fact, they had a lot of contact with a monastery not far from Clonakilty here. You may have visited there when you were a few years ago, down in Timilly Abbey, which was ransacked and sacked by Cromwell's forces as well. But the ruins are beautiful and have been retained to this day. But they had close contact there, and that monastery actually was founded in the 6th century by Saint Pelagia, who was the man who brought honey to Ireland. So the monks had a tradition of bringing inventions back into the country. But anyway, by the 1500s, the English were very concerned about the manufacture of whiskey and how widespread it was in the country, and they had no control over it. And they obviously saw revenue and tax coming from it. So they introduced legislation to regulate it and to give the license, of course, to their own elite. But of course, this never worked in Ireland, because what happened then was the industry went underground and into the monasteries. And like the monastery at Ahabaha, that was sacked by Cromwell's forces in the 1650s. And what happened was, when the forces came into the monastery, they came across the whiskey, of course, and they decided they would indulge themselves in it. And when they left the monastery, they were in very good spirits. But unfortunately for them, they were seen by some Irish rapparees and outlaws who captured them and slaughtered them. They slaughtered the drunken Cromwellians in a place called the Glen of Louncharoon. And the Cromwellian bodies were never found. And the English authorities, of course, put out the word that the bodies had been devoured by the native Irish. But this wasn't the case. This was purely propaganda to try and show that the Irish were as savage as themselves. The fact was that bodies had been thrown over a cliff that was extremely narrow and extremely deep into a ravine, and that was inaccessible to man. So the bodies have rested there, I believe, ever since. But after the destruction of the monastery at Ahabaha, Sean Scanlan and others began distilling the secret recipe that had been in the monastery. And they began to make the illicit whiskey in the mountains and in the glens of their own area, which became a lucrative business. And Joel will know this, that this survived, still survives up to the present time, the distilling of illicit whiskey, which we now call poteen, maybe Mountain Dew. Poteen coming from the fact that this was distilled in a small pot, poteen, which means it's kind of a small pot. It was regulated in the 1990s, and licenses given to some of the distilleries, but the illegal stuff, which is a clear whiskey with tremendous medicinal powers, still remains in parts of rural Ireland. And I believe it has played a fairly important role as well during the COVID pandemic, that people have got beneficial results from it. And you can rest assured it will be much better drinking than the bleach that was being promoted by some people in America last year. The less said, the better. So that would be sort of the history of the distilling experience that Sean Scanlan would have had.
So you think it's at least plausible that he would have been able to pick up this skill and that he could have brought this to the New World. That is amazing, because it seems to confirm this kind of burgeoning theory. So a large part of what we're reading in this diary is this is where things get supernatural, and this is where I begin to prefer more historical and naturalistic explanations. But perhaps you can give some light on this. That any of the contemporary accounts of Scanlan, did you find any contemporary accounts of Scanlan during your research? anything that might explain why he thought of himself as cursed, or why he might have said so often, or why he might have felt that they are going to find me here, was a common refrain in this. And so who the they are, and why he might have felt that he had been cursed.
Well, as I said, Matt, there was great distrust between Scanlan and Donncha Mór Dubh, and which was obviously something at play. And it is a fact and known that Donncha Mór Dubh was informed upon to the English. Who did it is an open question, but the finger is pointing in one direction. But as a result of the informer's actions, Donncha Mór Dubh was captured. And it is said that when he was captured, that he choked one of his captors with his shackled hands. In any event, he was overpowered, and he was hung from a tree at a place called Crushee in the Crue, which means in English, the little cross of the gallows. So this is a place where there were a number of, we would call fairy forts, and very few have ventured into those forts ever since, in case they would see Donncha Mór Dubh on his black stallion. But as I say, he was hung, and that was the end of him. But it has several repercussions. At that time, the penal laws were in vogue in Ireland. These were ferocious enactments of laws that were brought in by the English to force the native Irish Catholic into submission. All civil and religious liberties were taken from the people. You couldn't own property, you couldn't transact any property, you couldn't practice your religion. So everything was underground. But priests became hunted people. Priest hunters and priest killers were making a nice handy living. But what happened then was that young men were transported to France and to Spain and places and educated as priests, and they came back and they ministered amongst the peasants in the mountains and the countryside. And the priest who was in this list of the Fúca was a priest called Tar Teig O'Donovan Cleanach. In English, he'd be Father Teig O'Donovan of the Cleanach clan. The fact was that the O'Donovan surname was extremely popular and common, so they were distinguished by their clan, whether it was Cleanach or Bawn or Riach or whatever. So this man was Cleanach, but he had the protection of Donncha Mór Dubh when he was ministering to his people in the parish. So he was able to go with great immunity. He wouldn't be attacked by anybody when he had the protection of Donncha. But when Donncha was gone and dead, he was now exposed. So at that time, you see, on a Sunday, the priest would come to say a mass in the mountains. And you may be familiar with the term the mass rock. They would say that the altar would be a rock. And each Sunday, as Father Teig came to say his mass, he had the protection of Donncha Mór Dubh. But now Donncha Mór Dubh was no more. So Father Teig came to say his mass. And at that time, you see, mass would be said in Latin. But he would preach to the people in Irish, in Gaelic. But during mass, he cursed the informer that led to the capture and death of Donncha Mór Dubh. But what he did was, he cursed in Latin. So the congregation didn't understand precisely what he was saying. So nobody knew precisely what was being said. But they knew that he had cursed an informer. But the priest was the only person then who knew himself what he had said. But unfortunately, and sadly for him and for everybody else, he didn't make his way home. He didn't get home. On his way back, he disappeared and was never again seen. Now, the priest's curse, it would be said, would have mythical and maybe supernatural power, which would have far greater powers than maybe for a curse from you or I. But in any event, that was the end of poor Father Teig. It wasn't ever known who captured them, but at that time there was a notorious priest hunter and priest killer with the surname Nash, who was known as Nash un Arable, the arable meaning that he was a manifestation really of the devil. He took a serpent form. It is believed that he actually grew a tail. And National Arable was seen in the district on his white horse on that particular Sunday. But he wasn't seen capturing the priest. But Father Teig is believed to have been hung from the same tree that Donegal Moor Dubh was hung from. And the reason for that thinking is that ever since that time, that tree continues to shake. It is known as the shaking tree. And even on the calmest of days, that tree and the leaves are shaking. It never stopped. And another, I suppose, maybe supernatural event was that there was a field next to the monastery where the priests grew barley for malting and for the distilling of their whiskey, called Gort Honor. And Gort Honor would be a field of gold. Now, it wasn't a field of gold as we would know gold. It was called that because of the golden barley color. But after the killing of the priest, barley never again grew on that field. It would wither when it was sown. So the legend has it in the area that while that tree flutters without any breeze, the curse remains. So that is what the legend says, and I suppose the evidence is there to support it to a fair extent.
So if I want to look on this with the cold hard logical gaze, at the very least, we can imagine that Scanlan, hearing about this curse, hearing about these supernatural happenings, hearing about the shaking tree and so forth, would have had at the time, as a Catholic, would have taken this very seriously as a threat to his soul and to his life. So even nowadays, we can see the power this would have had on him to be so fascinated in his diary. So that's amazing. And I think you said earlier that Donnacher was a tenant perhaps of Scanlan. Yeah. So there's an extra bit of potential animosity there. We don't know if he was a harsh landlord, if the family. Oh, wow. Okay. My next question is about, I was certainly very skeptical that this all went back to Ireland, because it seems, of course it went back to Ireland because it's Joe. And so my next question, we have references about the deal with the devil. Maybe that's starting to become a little clearer, and we haven't been able to figure out what exactly he meant. And of course, Joe immediately went to the British as the devil. But what record do we have that the British, or that this Nash character that you've just mentioned might have been the devil that Sean Scanlan made a deal with?
Well, see, Joe will be familiar with this, that there's an old Irish saying that Mohammedan deal, Mohammedan, which means in English, my soul to the devil. And you would utter that if you were doing something risky. You might say, to hell with it, we'll chance it. But they said a more sinister, more sinister meaning, and a superstitious meaning, what we would call epishogue in some instances, where people would have sold their souls for worldly goods like gold or whatever. And like you will find lots of examples in Irish literature and folklore of people selling their soul to the devil. Sure. So it wouldn't be something new. So in Ireland of the 18th century, or indeed in any of the centuries, making a deal with the devil would be equated to be informing to the English. Because I suppose in all Ireland's history, the informer was probably worse than the devil. So the devil would be more welcome in some parts, I'm sure, than actually the informer. So Joe is probably right in saying that he believed that.
I was afraid you would say
that he sold to the devil when he informed to the British. And the only witness to that was probably Satan. And he's not going to tell us what was put on.
Unfortunately, no.
So we would have to use our imaginations as to what that deal might have contained, but certainly it has credence, yeah.
So I'm just incredible. I'm just in awe that so much of this lines up, and I guess the only missing piece, we have a very rich knowledge. I can't believe you were able to pull all of this up. But do we have any record of him leaving Cork for America? The friendship you had mentioned between the Scanlans, you said Harrison, I believe, and Penn was there, and that's really, I guess, the missing piece for us. Is there any record of him leaving Cork for America and for Pennsylvania in particular? Is there a way of telling if these dates might work?
Well, there was an academic from University College in Cork who was doing a PhD some years back, maybe 20, 30 years ago, on Irish folklore and pishogues and superstitions and that type of thing. And he came across the killing of Donncha Mór Dubh, the killing of Father Zeig, and of course then Scanlan came into it. And apparently he went to Queenstown, which would be the cove of Cork from where all the ships sailed to America back in the time. And we're talking now a long time back. So the manuscripts and the ship's manifests that would be very faded. But apparently from around 1750 or 1751, there is a ship's manifest where the name Scanlan appears to have been crossed out and replaced with the name Albert Harrison. So the view would be that Scanlan, realizing his danger, decided to change his name to Harrison, and he used the same name that the generation of his family, 2 generations previously, 50 or 60 years earlier, had changed to Harrison. So had he some contact with them still? Did he know where he was going? That's something maybe we may never know. But at that stage, the academic who was doing the research obviously was not in a position to take it beyond Queenstown, because he didn't know anything about what Joe has found now on the other side of the
Sure, no one did, right?
So that's something new. So his focus was on Donncha Mór Dubh and Father Zeig and those who were left behind. So it's up to us now, I suppose, to take the matter to the next stage and to take it to Pennsylvania.
I have to admit that that there might be this rich of a connection between your area in Cork and Lancaster that has then been re-cemented these 250 years later is amazing. And again, the skeptic in me wants to make sure not to take this too far, but to recap, so we have the idea that Scanlan, the author of this diary, existed, that we have historical record, that we believe that he might have felt himself cursed due to his informing or his alleged informing. I don't want to necessarily condemn the man, but it seems pretty clear for not only a leader of the White Boys, as you mentioned, but a priest killing, which would have been, as you say, the most serious, and that he leaves Cork for America due to family relations with Penn. It's kind of hard to imagine that all of that just lined up that way. I mean, again, it's hard to say conclusively, but you've really woven together this background knowledge into a narrative that fits with what we're saying and is yet really rigorously established. And it's kind of getting me a little bit spooked for sure. Is there any other things that you wanted to add? Any other information that you can think of that might add context here, that may strengthen this link between Scanlan and 250 years later, another Irishman who owns this mill, like potentially, if it was him? Any other links that you can think of, or any other information that might provide context for our blog community here?
Well, I would say as a result of what has been found in the flood, that the story is really just beginning. I mean, nothing was known of Scanlan's life after he left Ireland, but now that has changed. So it's like a jigsaw. The pieces are being put together slowly, but surely. So I can envisage a group coming from Lancaster to Ireland next year or the year after, following the footsteps maybe of William Penn, the Scanlans, and the Harrisons. I am planning a visit to Lancaster myself in 2022.
Beautiful.
So hopefully I'll be able to see the manuscripts and the diaries that you have there, and we might be able to get some clues from those. So like this story has been unfinished for almost 300 years.
Sure.
So it will probably remain, for a few years more. So, and the more the merrier. So I can't say right now if the shaking tree is still standing, because the place has been overgrown completely with vegetation, and nobody has visited that valley, I believe, for almost 100 years. So we're not sure if the curse, when the tree stands, the curse continues. So if the tree has fallen or whatever, in the meantime, the curse would have dissipated. So that's something we'll have to check out as well, I suppose. So basically, the place has been left to the fairies, maybe to the monks, busily distilling their whiskey still, to the ghosts of Dunluca and Moor Dover, to Father Teig, and maybe Nash and Arable, and Cromwell's men somewhere at the bottom of the ravine. So maybe the spirit of Sean Scanlan visits there from time to time. But I think what we could say for tonight, I suppose, is that no matter who haunts the place, whether at Lisdove, the Fúcar, Crushian, the Cruha, or in Glonsharoon for that matter, may they all live in harmony from this day forward, and may their spirits rest in peace.
Final question. I think we might share the same concern for Joe owning this place, if it is indeed cursed, and that it seems to cause madness. But with Joe, how would we know?
Yes, I think we'd have to do a scientific approach to that as well. We just can't look at something on the surface. We have to look beneath it.
Sure.
Try and put some meat on the bones of our research that will extend as far as Joe.
Yeah.
And link him to the story.
Yeah.
And see how it all stacks up together. Because maybe this was predestined as well, that Joe would take over the thing. Maybe it was all part of some sort of a spiritual or a mythical intervention from the monks or wherever, from a heavenly bed. We don't know. So it's something that's worth looking at. And with Joe's cooperation, I'm sure we'll get there.
And even though Joe has been accused of madness before, perhaps he's the person to bring this full circle and hopefully, as you say, bed down this curse and make things right. That will mean a peaceful existence at Sickman's Mill.
Yes, that is very important, to have a peaceful existence at the mill, but it's probably more important to have the peaceful existence back in the valley and so forth for the poor misfortunes who were there back 200 and 300 years ago. So there's a lot of writing on this and how Joe reacts and how we move it forward.
And you haven't been able to give Joe this full report yet. So this is maybe the first. This is the first venture into putting the meat in the bone and putting the story together. I'm honored to have had the conversation and that you took the time. I know that you're a busy man, and I can't say how much we appreciate this elucidation. And I'm sure we'll talk more when you're in Lancaster in 2022. And I can't say how much we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you too, Matt. Indeed, great talking to you.
Absolutely. All right.